Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Aaron and I am the Weekend Modder, and today I am here with a video to cover the RGH3 process for the Falcon and Jasper motherboard consoles. So that's going to be the Xbox 360 Fat series. So the first thing I want to jump into talking about here is the supplies and things that are going to be required to perform this modification. So first of all, where there's multiple options here, you're going to need a way to read and write the Nand of the console. There's a lot of choices on the market for what device you use to do that. None of them are wrong, just variations in speed and the exact wiring and options that you're going to get there. So the Matrix Flasher is a real cheap option. You can get those on eBay for $5-6. The X360 Flasher. This is probably my personal favorite one. This is made by Mod Shop, and it's not currently available for sale pretty much anywhere, but there will be another run of these, and this is a really solid device. It's actually faster than the Nandex. There's the Nandex itself, which is kind of my old trusty standby. These things have been around for a long time, are pretty reliable, and lots of information and guides out there for them. And then the new kid on the block is the Raspberry Pi Pico flashed with the Pico Flasher firmware. This guy I like a lot, and I do sell a custom cable set that has the same color coding wiring stuff. So this is a direct substitute for like the Nandex if you're looking for a cheap option here. For today, for my purposes and my comfortability, I'm going to stick with actually using the Nandex. But again, any device that's going to let you read and write the Nand, a JR programmer would also be another option here, and those are still available for sale as a slightly cheaper option. So we've got that covered. We've got a way to read and write our Nand. So the next couple of bits of supplies that are really critical to it are you need a 1N4148 diode and a 22K ohm resistor. So I have this product that'll be going up on the site here pretty soon, which is just this little package that includes that diode, that resistor, a couple little bits of heat shrink tubing, and a couple little bits of like 28 gauge wiring. So you do need a little bit of wire. You do need that resistor and the diode, and then some heat shrink tubing just makes it all so you can get a nice, tidy, clean install. Then to get the console apart, you're going to need at minimum a T8 and a T10 Torx screwdriver. I actually have started to sell a kit that comes with both those, a T8 and a T6, as well as a T8 and a T10, as well as a T6, because the T6 is the one that gets used on Xbox 360 controllers if you want to do like a set of LEDs on your controller or whatever. So you could pick these up from me, or if you've got a multi-bit set, whatever, but you're going to need those Torx screwdrivers in order to get into the console. And then the rest of it's more or less basic soldering supplies. So obviously you're going to need a soldering iron, you're going to need some solder itself, and then you're going to need some flux. So I sell some cheap flux that's like knockoff with a little plunger, makes it easy to squeeze and push out a little bit of plunger or a little bit of solder out of the tip. A fiberglass scratch pin is a really good idea. This is used for removing the coating on the motherboard to make it easier to get your solder to stick. So it's just a little like an abrasive pin basically. A X-clamp removal tool is a good idea. These will help you get the X-clamps off safely, as well as I use this little tip for like actually opening the console. And then a good sharp set of tweezers. There are some of the points on here where you end up kind of scraping the point in order to gain access to it. So a set of tweezers with a really nice sharp point is super handy to have. And then the last thing that I don't actually have one of right here on to show you is probably a set of thermal paste, because we are going to remove the heat sinks from the console probably to get this done. Freshening up your thermal paste is basically a requirement. If you don't do it and you remove the heat sinks and you put it back on there, you're really running a big risk to your console. So that's pretty much it. That's the supplies that we're going to use. And the console that we're going to modify is this guy right here. So it's an Xbox 360 Fat. I believe this is actually a Jasper, but the way you can tell, and is linked on my guide on weekendmodder.com, is by looking at the power socket here. And when you can, let's see if we can get some good lighting in there. There we go. So you can see that the top bar is broken into two sections like that. That pretty much tells you right away, on top of the fact that this thing has an HDMI port, that this is a Jasper motherboard console. So let's power it up and just make sure, see what dashboard we're on. And I like to recommend just doing a dashboard update prior to starting with this. The RGH3 modification can be performed on the console, even on the very latest, newish dashboard. So I actually like to get that out of the way and do that update before performing the modification. That way you're starting from a good, like clean place. So there's the boot up, and then there's some profiles from whoever it was that had this console before. I bought these at a pawn shop pretty recently. So the controller, I think I have synced here. All right. And let's just go take a look. So hold right bumper all the way over to the settings, console settings, and then system info. So this is on 17489, which is a pretty recent dashboard, but 17559 is actually the current dashboard. So if you want to do the same as me and just go ahead and get it updated, what I would recommend here is if you literally do a Google search for Xbox 360 USB update, right? The first result will be this support.xbox.com article. And here, there's these how to update drop downs, and there's this copy to a USB flash drive. So what I recommend is you download this file from the link, and then you do right what it says here, right? You unzip the file and copy it into the flash drive. So I have already got that done here. So I have a USB ready to go. So when I hit that into the console, my expectation is that within just a few moments here, I'm going to get a pop-up on screen saying like update found. Do I want to apply it? Yeah, there you go. So an update has been found. Do I want to apply it? Yes, right? So we'll go ahead and do that. And it asks you like security updates too, right? You just have to say yes twice, basically. All right, so now if we go over to settings, console settings, system info, now we're on 17559, the very latest dashboard. And at this point, I'm feeling good about proceeding with the modification. So next step that we're going to do is actually going to be to break down and open up the console. And it's been a while since I've tried to do this on video at all, but I'm going to try to give you guys some tips on how to get these things open here. So first thing I typically do is just remove the hard drive and the faceplate. So the hard drive release, and then the faceplate, I stick my thumb and just pull. Sometimes you lose these little fragile doors and stuff. You can be more careful than I am, but it actually looks like that was missing the little spring here. That's why it flew off. Your first sign that this console's been into before or not is right here with the little security sticker. And then from here, we start pulling off the side panels and that sort of thing. So the side one, the front part, I often will just force here. And then I use the X-clamp removals tools pointed end to look down on these sides. And I'm out of practice on this, but push in these little release tabs. Yeah, so you heard that click when I pushed down on that. That's what's releasing these end caps here. So flip it over, and there we go. So no damage to it, but we can tell this is going to be a dirty console here. All right, so other side, same story. The first ones I'll often just apply a fair amount of pressure, and see it's not giving up exactly right. So I'm gonna poke around in here until I can see if I can find. Oh, there it is. And then the next one, and the last here. All right, and flip it again, and same story, right? Just work it out. There we go. So in this case, it looks like we did lose one little tab, or who knows if it was already broken or not. And once again, evidence that this thing is going to be a dirty bunny. All right, so now from this point, what I do is I'll hold it upright. I've got some pressure applying with my hands to separate these bits, and then I start popping loose these clips, right? So you stick the sharp tooth of the X clamp removal in there and just release those clips, one at a time. And then not, being careful to not let them slide back together. So that gets my console separated from the front. While you've got access to it, good idea to go ahead and pull the eject button, which just pull close to where it attaches here, low down like I did. If you pull up here, you're liable to snap the thing off. So you want to pull, real close to where it attaches. And then flip the console over here, and same sort of ideas. I'm holding separating force, right? I'm pushing downward with these fingers, and I'm pushing upward with this finger to apply, some separation. And then again, that little tooth can go in here and push in on each of these spots. And these tend to be fragile over time. I actually like to set them up on end. Let's see if I can get some video of this. Set the oh. Yeah. So I like to set the console up on end like this at this point, because then it allows me to have a little bit better control over the thing falling forward or not. So once I've got a little separation over by the power socket, I just kind of ride, pushing in each one. And you can hear they kind of want to snap back together. So sometimes you have to put a good amount of force from the other side. There's certainly probably better ways to do this, but there we go. And so that last one's being a pain. I'm just gonna pull it right off there. So good thing I don't do send-in service anymore, right? I'm just out of practice. All right, so now at this point we've got the console shell off the back, and this is where those T8 and T10 screws come in. So the T10 screwdriver is all of the larger ones, and then the T8 are these little black guys by the X clamps. So I'm going to pull all the screws out. Yo. All right, now T8. All right. So now with all of the screws out, we can flip the console back over and actually take the top off. Again here, if you hadn't already removed the eject button, do that now, and just lifts right off. As we expected, this guy's a dirty birdie, coated in pretty good amounts of dust here. So the next step will be, there's a little piece of silver tape that holds the DVD drive in. If you want to, just keep it from rattling or whatever, you can kind of flake that out, or you can just sever it. It's real thin. DVD drive kind of lifts straight up, then unplugs out the rear. Then the little clip on the front for the LED diffuser, if you just lift on the top, you can kind of pull that guy out. And then there's your last three screws that we're going to have. So those are T8 screws as well, same as the ones that were around the X clamp area, and there's 3 of them. Now you can just pull straight out on the RF board. This is basically what contains the thing that talks to your controllers, is what this is about. And I like to go ahead and just remove the DVD drive cable. So I'm just kind of wiggling and pulling up. And then same thing on the SATA cable. This is the data cable for it. I get my finger under there, and then I lift more or less straight up to avoid, damaging the port or anything. And then the heat duct shroud here has a little clip right there. And once again, the X clamp removal tool comes in handy because you can kind of wiggle it in there and just use a prying motion, and then it lifts straight up. And then the rear fan, the motherboard casing, or the frame that it's in, flexes a little bit. So you can see if I push back on this, so what I do is I just push back on that until it comes off of these clips, and then I can get my finger in here, pull forward, and then up and out, and then release the power connection for it. So now the console is down to just the bare motherboard and heat sinks inside here. When you want to remove the motherboard from the casing, what I do is do kind of a front to back pivot. That seems to be what's less stressful on the board. So I'll actually start by kind of grabbing on these guys and lifting up. So you can see how this is coming up out of there now, right? And so I just continue with that motion and pull up and then forward out, right? So now we've got our motherboard completely loose and a very dirty desk because this thing is filthy. So before I continue here, I'm going to pause. I'm going to take this thing out to my air compressor and just hit it with an air compressor to blow off all this grossness, so I'm not just dealing with it in my house here. All right, so now we've got the console cleaned, just blown off with an air compressor and extracted from the motherboard and ready to go. So the first thing we want to do is solder up to it so that we can go ahead and read the Nand of this console. And you do that via the set of headers that's over here. There is a diagram on the Weekend Modder Falcon Jasper Fat RGH3 page. So if you go to the guides drop down on weekendmodder.com, RGH3 Falcon Jasper brings you to this page, and here's a kind of a recap of the required supplies and stuff we talked about, and then identifying the console a little bit, opening it up and breaking it down, and then here we go, soldering in a Nand read writing programmer, right? So again, there's lots of options on what to do here as far as which programmer to use, but they all boil down to using these same points. And the vast majority of them, the X Flasher, the Pico Flasher with my cable set, the Nand X, the JR programmer, all use this same color coding. So any of them that you do, you're going to use these same points, and any of the ones that I named off are going to follow even the same black, brown, red, orange, yellow, green, blue sort of color coding. So to prepare the points, so that they can receive some solder better, we're going to use the Fiberglass Scratch Pin that we talked about before. So if we get in here nice and tight so you can see this, right now the pin headers kind of have a dull appearance to them, right? So the copper is kind of more bronzy and look in its color. And what this fiberglass scratch pin, or this abrasive pin, is going to do for us is kind of remove that coating and polish things up a little bit. So there should be a noticeable difference when I'm done here between before and after of the shininess of these points here. And you don't want to go overboard because if you do, you could remove too much coating and have a bridging problem there. But once you see the shininess kind of increase there, that should be visible to you here. So if we tilt it especially, you can see that those points are a lot shinier than those around it now. They're much more easily going to receive solder. So then this header up here is going to be the other point where we make connections to. And so I'm going to give it the same treatment. Just a back and forth and change directions is kind of how I do it. You know, do a diagonal one way, diagonal the other way, back and forth, up and down, whatever. And then you can kind of see it when it, you know, in person, especially the shininess really increases there. So now we've got both spots all prepared that way. And so the next thing that I would do is to get some flux over those spots. Flux is your friend. It's going to make this whole process a lot easier. So I oftentimes will push out a little flux and then grab it with my tweezers. And then use that to deliver it to the console here. And there's not really such a thing as too much, other than the fact that it'll make it a little more difficult for cleanup. So, you know, a healthy dose is better than not enough. So push out just a little bit more flux here, grab it, and throw it into this guy. And so now the next section is just going to be taking the wire set that corresponds to whatever Nand read-write device that you're going to be using and getting that soldered in. So in my case, again, I'm going to use a Nand X today. So I'm going to grab my Nand X wires, and these are the same set that actually work with the X Flasher, the JR Programmer, or the Nand X. And like I said, I've got a Pico Flasher that's the same color set, so that the color coding doesn't have to change for you and stuff. And all I've done on the end here is I actually cut the legs off of some resistors and then soldered that and put some heat shrink tubing to make this set a bit more reusable. And so that's why you see the ends kind of looking like they are here. Having a rigid end that you can kind of bend and flex and will hold its position ends up being valuable. It makes it a little bit easier to perform the wire installation here. So reference back to the install image on weekendmodder.com. Again, you've got the points here all laid out for you on those two headers. So let's get that installed here. So you can see what I'm doing here is pre-tinning each spot and making sure that it has a good little solder ball to it. Now this last one, the yellow point, is the ground plane. And you can see I'm holding my heat on it for a while before I even attempt to start doing it. And that's just because the ground plane can dissipate a lot more heat. So it takes holding the iron on that spot a fair bit longer. And then the other header, you know, I always just keep it simple. So I count over 1, 2, and then it's the next set. So it's the third one over from the left on both sides there. Right. There we go. So now, I'm not totally happy with the amount of solder that's stuck on that one. So I'm just going to see if I can increase it a little bit. So now we have a nice little ball of solder on each of the points that we need to connect to. And that is how I like to set things up to make it nice and easy for the installation. And so at this point, it's just following the color coding, pulling out your wire. So what I like to do is I'll stick my iron in here, I'll heat up the solder ball that I'm targeting for the position. And then once I see that it's liquefied, I'll just kind of touch the end of the the wire that I'm using to it for the correct color, and it just gets stuck in there. So the next one is the brown. There we go. And then orange. And you can see how having a little bit of curve to these points and stuff makes it easier given the directionality of where they have to come from and stuff. Let's see. No, that should have been red. Ooh, look, I made a mistake. I'm going to claim my color blindness as part of that. Red, then orange. So this one should be red. So you can see I can bend it a little bit to get it in the position that I need it to be in. There we go. Then orange. And then again, that last one, yellow ground, may take the longest amount of time to re-liquefy because it could dissipate a lot of heat. Come on now. There we go. I'm not terribly happy with that, but I believe it'll be functional. And then the top ones up here. So same story. There we go. So with that done, what we can do now is actually read the NAND of the console. And so for that, we'll need the JRunner software and then our NANDX to actually get that done. So let's set up for that. All right, so I've got the NANDX plugged in, got it hooked up via USB. I've got standby power connected to the console, but I've not turned the console on in any way. So what we need to do is launch JRunner here, and JRunner has the read NAND function. I had it set to 1 for doing some testing before. You want the number of NAND reads to be at least 2. And then we should be able to hit this little question mark guy and get a confirmation that we've got a good connection. And so here I got device not found. Let me just double check that this isn't one of my damaged NANDXs. I just grabbed it out of the drawer. So we want to get at least 2 good NAND reads so that we can verify that we've got good copies, right? Compare them to each other. So you should see your NANDX logo inside JRunner with the USB hooked up. And you can use this little query button to verify that you've got a good connection. You should get a response here and a kind of an identification of your console. So this tells me I've got a particular flash config, and look, it even confirms what I said before, that this is a Jasper 256 megabyte console. So we're going to go ahead and hit read NAND, and we'll just confirm that it's a Jasper 256. And this should take just a few minutes to confirm the full dumps. With them being big block NANDs, I believe it dumps like 64 megabytes by default. So it's going to be like 2 or 3 minutes per read. So we'll go ahead and let that get through here. And what we're looking for at the end is going to be a message that shows that we've got 2 NAND dumps. The file paths to each will be in here. and that they are the same, that they've been compared via checksum, and that they're identical. So we'll let this go and get those NAND reads done. Now that we have successfully read the NAND twice and gotten our NANDs are the same message, we can go ahead and move on to performing the RGH3 installation itself. So for that, we're going to need the diode and the resistor, and we're going to use the instructions on the Weekend Modder page here to get that done. So I'm going to be taking these images, so it'll be updated when this video comes out. But we're going to attach the CPU bypass and the post bus connections. So it's just a 2-wire install, and that's the next step that we're going to move forward with. All right, so our next step is to install the CPU PLL wire over to the DB1 F1 point. You can see that I have updated that diagram on weekendmodder.com. So you've got a highlight. This PLL point's been used in a bunch of other RGH stuff, and then the DB1 F1 has also been used with some JTAG stuff back in the day. So none of these are new points. When you go to install this using the bit of wire and the 22 k ohm resistor, you might be tempted to try to install the resistor directly to the point. I would strongly advise against that. Instead, what I would do is trim up the wire so that you have a small length available, solder that to the resistor, use your heat shrink tubing over that, solder the other end to the wire, so you're actually going to end up extending this wire by a little bit, and then you have a wire to connect to each end where it needs to go. So we're going to be installing the PLL point, routing it down around over to the south bridge hole, popping through, and then hitting the DB1 F1 point, which is over here on this side of the console. So the first thing I'm going to do is to prepare the wires, actually. So I'm going to use my hand tool, helping hands here. So I want the connection to be entirely protected by the heat shrink tubing here. I'm trimming off some of the resistor leg length. And actually, a little bit on the side. All right, so now resistors have no polarity, so it's not important for us to pay attention how this thing is oriented. But you can see that it's just connected in line with this, so we can just slip on our little bit of heat shrink tubing, and we can go ahead and heat this guy. Alright, so that's ready to go. So let me clean up a little bit here. It's also a good idea to pre-tin the end of your wire. So now I've got just that tiniest little bit of wire kind of pre-tinned on the end. And now we can actually do our Pll point installation. So as indicated in the diagram, that guy is under here. we go. This point is relatively fragile in my estimation, so I would think that it would be a good idea to put a little dab of hot glue or something here to hold it down. If you have a little bit of tape, whatever there. Otherwise, you can just be real careful with it. But you can see we've got our connection and it's not moving under any pressure here. So I'm satisfied with that. And again, our resistor is inside of our heat shrink tubing there. And so what I'm going to do is just run it straight over into that hole by the south bridge here. And once I get to the top side, I can then route all the way to the DB1 F1 point. So get that fed through in a nice way so we're not tugging on things. I actually do have a little bit of electrical tape right here. So what I'm gonna do is use a little bit of it. Just kind of give it a little stopsy right there. That way if it gets pulled on, we're not gonna yank out that spot. Now I'd be careful with this wire routing here too, because if that gets under the X clamp and you pinch that down, you could break the wire basically. Alright, then from the top side, really simple. And this is a super easy point to solder to. We're just running right there to DB1 F1. So first thing I'm going to do is just trim my wire appropriately. That's why I trim it a little long, because I use these snips to do the trimming. I'm just going to tin the wire real quick here, aka just soak it in some solder. Get a little solder built up on that point. This is where a set of tweezers comes in handy, because I can't get my big old sausage fingers in there, but I can get a pair of tweezers. And there we go. DB1 F1 is connected. Let's see, can I get that tucked under there? There we go. Kind of hold it down against the board. Just give it a little touch. It's not going anywhere. All right, next up, we need to do the post bus over to the point near R3P7. And so the main routing on this one, actually I rotate the board this way for it. We're going from the post point here to a point that's just up over here. So we'll get in on that post point first. Good idea to use a little bit of flux. I didn't on the last point that you saw me do, and I kind of regretted it. So basically it's the row of them, starting with the one that's not separated, right? Or that's, you know, the first in the close-up series. So that guy right there. And then, and this one is where we need to use the diode. And the diodes have a indicator. It's going to be kind of hard to see here. Actually, that's not that hard.
the little black stripe on the bottom, right? That's the directionality indicator for the diode, and that needs to go facing towards the post point. So some tutorials even say to like solder the diode wire to the post point. Again, I am very much opposed to that idea. I think that the additional stiffness that you get from the wire there is, you know, the wire that comes out of the resistor, this stuff. I mean, it's not like super stiff, but it is way more stiff than the wire itself, right? So, and my suggestion would be to not to solder the resistor or the diode directly to the points. So, same sort of technique, just wrapping some wire around the leg of the diode, and then I'll trim it off afterwards. With the resistor, I trimmed it off first, really doesn't matter. I like to flip them around just because it's easy to do, because I'm right-handed. All right, and same story other side. There we go. So now what I'll do is I'll just trim off outside of the area that I soldered to, right? And so now my diode is connected with a wire on either end. Now the thing is with this one, it is important to pay attention to the directionality. Unlike a resistor, diodes have a direction that they go. So before you slide that heat shrink tubing or before you heat it off, maybe give yourself some sort of indicator, you know, where that diode is oriented at. So right now, my dark black part, whatever, is down here. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a tiny little piece of electrical tape and I'm going to put it on the wire on the bottom side, right? This is just in case I get confused later about what direction my diode is oriented. Now I have an indicator. Little black line faces little black line, you know, gives me a clue here. So now I can take my heat shrink tubing, which is going to obscure, you know, that for me, and I can slide it down over my diode, and then I can go ahead and shrink it. All right. Cool. So let's get the console back in place here and do our final wire installation. So for this, I know my general orientation is something like that, right? And my wire lengths are pretty long for what they need to be. So I'm gonna trim this guy up a little bit. And get some wire exposed on the end here. Go ahead and tin the wire. All right. Go ahead and get a little bit of good solder on my iron. And boop him right into place. All right, so now I can play with my routing just a little bit. And I like to route that guy up and through the X clamps here. So again, might just take a little bit of little tiny piece of electrical tape. just secure that guy down right there so he can't be yanked and you know, pull out my wire. And then the next part is down here. There's a little spot right next to where it's labeled R3P7. So you can see R3P7 right here, and you see that little shiny spot right there. That's my target. So I'm going to get a tiny bit of flux, drop it right on that spot. Then I'm going to go ahead and see if I can pre-tin it a little bit, get a little extra solder to stick to it. There you go. Built a little mountain. Right, and so now I can kind of decide about my wire length and stuff here. So routing it past, I'm going to say a little bit extra there, right there. So that's not needed. Go ahead and, go ahead and strip the end of this wire a little bit. So there's the end of my wire stripped. And once again, pre-tin it. Careful doing that right over the board like I am. Get a little fresh glob of solder on my iron. And bam. So now, I think what I'll do is one final little bit of electrical tape. I'll get that on the board right here to give that guy a little resistance. So now we have installed our RGH3 wiring for the console. We can go back and write the ECC file or the bin file from the RGH3 pack and go ahead and try to boot Zell. I know earlier I mentioned we may have to remove the X clamps here. So obviously you can see I did not do that in the course of this. So I'm not going to take them apart right now. But if you've been handling the console by lifting it on the heat sinks, there's a decent chance that you break the thermal bond that they have made with the GPU and CPU. Or if you removed the heat sinks, right, you definitely want to go ahead and apply fresh thermal paste at this point. So go back into the case here. And we're going to need standby power and our Nandex. So here's my Nandex. Oh, let's give you guys a view here. So we've got standby power going in. Nandex getting hooked up. All right. So now, time to load up JRunner. All right, hit our console. You see our flash config identifies our console. We already read our NAND before here. So this NAND dump 1 and NAND dump 2, we do a NAND compare. NANDs are the same. Those are our good reads here, right? So we want to have glitch 2 selected. Then we want to go ahead and select RGH3. And then there's an option of whether to do 10 megahertz or 27 megahertz. From what I've understood and read about, 27 seems to work best for most people, but do feel free to play with that, right? So I'm going to say create ECC, and now I'm going to say write ECC to my Jasper 256. Say OK. All right, so that happens really fast. That gets written to the console super quick. And then now we can disconnect our Nandex, disconnect power for just a moment. And I really don't think that it's a good idea to run these things without fans for very long at all. So I usually take the extra 2 seconds that it takes to drop in the fan and the shroud, the duct, whatever you want to call it, so that it can pull some air over itself here. So now we'll go ahead and plug that in, grab the RF board that has the power button on it, make our lives easier, plug in some HDMI, and hopefully when I hit this power button, we should boot into Zell. So we see the, let's see. There's an indicator, and there's Zell. So now we're going to need to snag our CPU key. If you've got a network cable handy that's on your network, you can plug that in and actually pull the CPU key across your network. But what I tend to do is actually just snap a picture of it and then type it out into JRunner. At least that's how I got things kind of set up going right now. So I'm going to do that, grab my picture. Now I can power off the console. I go ahead and disconnect power from it. And I'm going to pull up JRunner and type in that CPU key. So let's see. All right, and so I typed it in correctly, and get the decryption information here, including like your DVD key and stuff. And so now you can go ahead and create your XE build image, which is that UPD flash.bin. Remember to leave RGH3 selected like you had it. And what you end up with is that UPD flash.bin in the load source category. And we need to write that to the console now. And so this is going to be another 64 megabyte image. It's the full thing. And so, oh, it wanted to power on when I plugged it in. So what you're going to want to do is write that back to the console using the Nandex. So if we go back to the camera here, I've reconnected standby power. I'm going to reconnect my Nandex. And then bop back into JRunner. And again, we've got the UPD flash. I'm just going to say write Nand. Okay. So now we got to wait the 3-4 minutes, whatever it is, for that Nand to get written to the console. And then that'll be it. That will be an XE build RGH3 Jasper motherboard console. Maybe we'll spend a few minutes talking about how to load that thing up with like XEX menu to get started here once we get done. All right, so we're about to finish up that long write to the console here, and that will technically make this a modded XE build console ready to go. Once we have it in that state, I was thinking that we'd go through the process of installing, say, XEX menu or something on there. So I just finished up. Let's see. We go ahead and disconnect the Nandex. I like to disconnect power for just a second, plug it back in, and let's just give it a test boot here. Oh, nice and quick. And we should see like regular dashboard basically. All right, so from here, what I like to do with my USBs in order to format them and get them ready for loading content onto them is you can make the Xbox kind of create the folder structure for you by putting the USB in and then creating a really basic profile and saving it to it. So what I'll do is I'll fire up the controller and go to social. I'll do sign in or out, and it's asking me to create a profile, right? So I'm going to create a profile. I'm going to save it to the USB storage device. And I'm just going to leave everything default, right? So the whole point of this is that it will create the folder structure for content to be stored on the USB for me now. So USB storage, you should see profile there. So I'm going to turn this thing off and go ahead and plug it back into the computer. All right, so we've got the USB drive reinserted here. And if you can't see this content subfolder, what you'll want to do is hit the view option and check the box for hidden items. You see when I uncheck that, it disappears here. So that content folder exists because we forced the system to save a USB profile or a profile to the USB. Inside there, you'll find the 000 blah blah blah. I think it's 16.0 directory, and then there may or may not be other content in here depending on what you have saved. Pretty much every copy of XEX menu that you download anywhere will unzip and include this code 99 directory to it. So you can see this code 9999, and it's about 200 megabytes. This is so that will just drag directly into the all zeros named folder. And once that copy completes, there's another subfolder inside there, and then a file with a wild name to it, whatever. That is XEX menu. And then so we'll be able to insert this into the console and go to the games menu and launch XEX menu, which is like its own file browser and utility that you can use to then jump off into lots of other places. If you want to install Freestyle Dash, you can then leverage XEX menu to start Freestyle Dash or do Dash launch or whatever you're into there. So I'm going to go ahead and eject my USB drive. We'll go ahead and get the USB ready to go. I didn't even unplug the console, so it's all still here, ready to go. We'll boot her up. There's the USB. We'll plug it in a second. So really nice, fast instant boots. I'm really pleased with that. So there's the console booting just fine. So here we're going to go to the Games tab and see that we have nothing in the My Games section. It just wants to spin and spin, right? Nothing there. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in the USB. So there we go. And so now when we go into the My Games area, oh, there it is. I didn't wait long enough. There's the XEX menu 1.2, and if we launch that, the profile that we created before comes in handy because it forces you to pick a profile. And then the main navigation methods for XEX menu are like left and right bumper to navigate through different things, and then you can select whatever you got. So you can see that we can navigate through the onboard flash, through the USB, you know, everything like that. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. This is now an RGH3 Jasper Xbox 360 with XEX menu installed on it and ready to go. I hope you found the tutorial useful. Have a good day.